So I got my Bible here open, and if you have a Bible, you can pull it out. I'm going to be in Proverbs chapter 9. If you have a Bible, just hold it up right now. I want to see who all's got their Bible. Wow, that was more than I thought. So several people have their Bible with them. Cool. Actually, Proverbs chapter 9, it says this in verse 1. Wisdom has built her house. She has carved its 7 columns. She has prepared a great banquet mixed with wines and set the table. She has sent her servants to invite everyone to come. She calls out from the heights overlooking the city. Come in with me, she urges the simple. I think that's pretty cool right there, is that wisdom is literally calling out for us. But you have to have a spiritual ear to listen. You have to actually have discipline to listen. How many of you know that maybe when you were a kid or something like that, you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing, right? Maybe you're stealing a bike, you're lying in school, whatever, and you hear and feel wisdom calling out to you, saying like, hey, this is unwise, I should not do this. Or maybe the wisdom that called out to you is like, hey, there's a Bible study for Christian business owners, and I know I'm not exactly where I'm supposed to be yet in my business. I need wisdom, right? So it's like, it's always calling out to you to take you deeper. It says, come in with me, she urges the simples, right? To those who lack good judgment, she says, come eat my food and drink the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways behind and begin to live. Learn to use good judgment. Anyone who rebukes a mocker will get an insult in return. Anyone who corrects the wicked will get hurt. So don't bother correcting mockers. They will only hate you. But correct the wise, and they will love you. Instruct the wise, and they will be even wiser. Teach the righteous, and they will learn even more. Fear of the Lord, and this is what we talked about last week, fear of the Lord is the foundation of wisdom. Knowledge of the Holy One results in good judgment. Wisdom will multiply your days and add years to your life. How many of you guys want to live a long life? Literally, there's a hack right there that wisdom will multiply your days. If you become wise, you will be the one to benefit. If you scorn wisdom, you will be the one to suffer. The woman named Folly is brash. She is ignorant and doesn't know it. She sits in her doorway on the heights overlooking the city. She calls out to men going by who are minding their own business. Come in with me, she urges the simple. So check this out. Verse 1, through the first 4 verses, it talks about wisdom calling out. But check this out. It says folly calls out too, right? So what I've seen to be true as a Christian business owner, and just really as a Christian in general, is there's always things calling out to me, right? Whether it be the enemy on one side, right? Your flesh or the Lord. And what I've seen to be true is like, yes, we have to beat our flesh into submission. Like how many of you know, like you've got to walk this thing out. Like it's not going to be easy. You've got to, live a righteous life. And we talked about that last week. But then you also have to have discernment, right? Because here's what I've seen to be true is there are a lot of good options, right? Like how many of you right now put me in the chat if you're a business owner that has options? Can we turn the air on cool? If you've got options right now, me. Yeah, so you've got options. You could start this product line. You could launch this new offer. You could hire this new coach. You could shut down your business and get a W-2 job again. You could buy a business. You could sell your business. You could, hire a new employee. You could fire an employee. You could start tithing from your business. There's all these options, right? And what we actually need is clarity on the next step, right? And I talk about this all the time, is that clarity isn't always clarity on the whole framework. The Lord usually gives you clarity on the next step. He'll give you the end picture. He'll prophesy it to you. He'll give you a vision, a word, and then you're like, Lord, that's so far away. How am I ever going to get there? And then he begins to speak to you about your next step. Right? Yeah, exactly what Jeffrey said. So what we need is wisdom, and I've seen this to be true as well. It's easy to spot a lie of the enemy, right? Oftentimes we get deceived into believing them, but it's not going to be like usually like, hey, actually take all the money in your business and go gamble it. Take all the money in your business and invest it into meme coins, right? Take all the money in your business and go, down to Vegas and hand it out on the street. It's like, okay, right? Like, we know that that's stupid. But what if you here's a great opportunity that looks like it could be God next to a God opportunity? We need to have the wisdom and discernment to spot the difference, right? So let's keep reading. Folly calls out for a hearing. She's brash, she's ignorant, and doesn't know it. She sits in her doorway on the heights overlooking the city. She calls out to men going by, minding their own business. Come in with me, she urges the simple, to those who lack good judgment. Stolen water is refreshing. Food eaten in secret tastes the best. But little do they know that the dead are there. This is so good. And this is what I feel like the Lord wants to do today, is there are pockets in our life or our business that what we like to do is we like to cover up. I'll never forget, I was 14 at a church service, and this pastor was preaching on sin, and he talked about living a life where you don't have to cover anything up. And he was talking about, how do you know if you're in sin? And it's like, usually, the Holy Spirit will speak to you, but then if you get into a cycle of living in sin, you can become numb to it, and then you have to cover up. So let's just pray this, that the Lord would shine light on anything that we've been covering up. Because ultimately, we're here because we want the blessing of the Lord, and we want to fulfill the purpose that God has for us. But the contingency to fulfilling that purpose and walking in the blessing is we have to be intimate with Him. Like, how are we going to be, God is not a genie, right? He's not a genie in a bottle where we can just, shake up the bottle and say, Lord, I want to make $100K a month. I want to make $50K a month. Like, He is our Father, right? And as a dad, I want to give good gifts to my son, but I'm not going to give him things that could hurt him, right? So I think about this the other day. Jed, my son, he sees a knife on the counter, and he's like screaming, like, I want this knife. I want this knife. I'm like, dude, you're not getting the knife. And I put the knife up, and he throws a fit. And that's how we are with God sometimes. My 1.5-year-old son isn't ready and mature enough to use the knife. He doesn't have the skill, the character, or the maturity to handle it. And oftentimes, the knife for us could be wanting to make more money, right? Wanting to be further along in ministry, wanting to be at the end goal already. And God is just saying, hey, son, daughter, you're actually not ready for it. Why? Because there's still stuff hidden in the dark. And it's crazy. We're reading Proverbs. It's not even necessarily talking about sin. It's talking about, just the difference between wisdom and folly. But even here, they're calling out saying, hey, food is better eaten in the dark. And isn't that what the enemy tries to tell you? Like, hey, it would actually be faster if you did it my way instead of God's way. You'll actually get more fulfillment by going back to drinking again, right? Like, you don't need to read your word. Why don't we just sit up and scroll on TikTok all night? And it's like, no, right? We're going to choose wisdom. But little do they know that the dead are there. Her guests are in the depths of the grave. Something Travis used to say all the time on our challenges, and I'm going to ask you to speak into this, is all the time he would be like, the most powerful place in the world where all the dreams are, laid, most of the dreams of the world are laid, is in the grave. Why? Because we chose to tune our ear to folly instead of wisdom. Yeah, let's do this. Let's read Luke 16. So basically, so far today, if you can keep up with the things we've said so far, we've basically talked about wisdom versus folly, right? God's way versus the enemy's way, right? But I want to talk about the parable of the shrewd manager, because this is really good. So I'm going to start reading Luke 16. Jesus told this story to his disciples, right? There was a certain rich man who had a manager handling his affairs. One day, a report came to the manager, basically came to him that the manager was wasting his employer's money. So the employer called him in and said, "What is this I hear about you? Get your report in order because you're going to be fired." How many of you have ever gotten a report that you're going to be fired, right? The manager thought to himself, "Now what? My boss has fired me. I don't have the strength anymore to dig ditches, and I'm too proud to beg. I know how to ensure that I'll have plenty of friends who will give me a home when I'm fired." So he invited each person who owed money to his employer to come and discuss the situation. He asked the first one, "How much do you owe him?" The man replied, "I owe him 800 gallons of olive oil." So the manager told him, "Take the bill and quickly change it to 400 gallons. So basically, this dude knows he's about to get fired. So he's like, "I'm going to make sure I have a place to live, and I'm going to go, and I'm going to basically cut all these people that owe this guy money a deal. So that way, when I am fired, the people that I forgave some of their debt will let me live with them." Isn't it crazy how the devil will lie to you and have you believe that the way to actually get wealth is his way? But in reality, it basically winds you up living, eating from pigsties, and then begging to come back home. The Bible says sin is fun for a season, right? But it leads to pain. It leads to suffering. It leads to having to beg people who owe you money to give you half of it so you can deal with them to even be able to step back in and have a home, right? So the enemy's goal for you is to kill you, to steal from you, to take all your joy, to steal all your money, and to destroy everything you've built, especially in business. He would love nothing more than to get you slipping up, making mistakes, and not handling things properly. He would love to put you in a season of depression so you can't even look at the computer screen and work, right? He'd love to put you in relationship with bad business partners so you can't build what God's called you to build. He'd love for you to partner with somebody who doesn't believe in tithing. He'd love for you to screw over your customers and stop caring about them and view them as dollar signs. Like, this is the plan the enemy has for many of you, right? So we need wisdom. Wisdom to what? Overcome the plans of the enemies. We need the full armor of God, right? Let's keep reading. Verse 5. So he invited each person, right, and basically gave them a deal. In 7 it says this, "And how much do you owe my employer?" Right, he invited the next man. "I owe him 1,000 bushels of wheat," was the reply. Here the manager said, "Take the bill and change it to 800. Right, and it says in verse 8, "The rich man had to admire the dishonest rascal for being so shrewd." All right, so even the rich guy was like, "Dang, this guy's pretty shrewd. He's pretty smart. Like, he knows he's about to get fired, and he's trying to make some friends." Like, I respect the thought, right? And then it says this, "And it is true that the children of this world are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than are the children of light." So here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then when your possessions are gone, they are going to welcome you into an eternal home. If you are faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large ones. But if you are dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. And if you are untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? And if you are not faithful with other people's things, why should you be trusted with things of your own? No one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. Many of us have heard this before, but I wanted to talk about something that I was thinking about this morning as I was driving. Basically, I think we're conditioned to think and believe that God is not a rewarder, right? Like, there's this pastor I follow, and I know this might ruffle some feathers, but he has a private jet, right? And a lot of people are more offended by a pastor who has a private jet than a pastor who has an affair. It's like, "Oh, man, he must have had a hard time, like, I guess he just slept around. But you see a pastor with a jet, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that somebody could have so much money, right? Well, look at King David. Do you think that King David was broke? Look at King Solomon. He's the richest man to ever live, and we're actually, just got through reading out of one of the books he wrote. So if you don't like wealth and you don't like money, then you might have a problem with a lot of the people that wrote the Bible, right? I've never seen God bless someone with poverty. If you could find me the verse, that would be awesome to see, but I don't think it's a thing, right? When God blesses people, he adds to them and doesn't attach sorrow with it, right? So there's basically two ways to go about this. So let me start here. How many of you feel called to make a lot of money? Put me in the chat. If you feel called to be radically generous, to tithe each month what your old income was, to pay people's cars off, to sow seed. Yeah, a lot of you guys. So there's basically two ways you can get it. A, you could do it the devil's way, where it's like he's holding a carrot in front of your face, and you're never going to get it, and you're going to spend your whole life loving money. Or you could get yourself in order and do it God's way, which basically in this parable he's saying, if you can't be trusted with little, how am I going to trust you with more? I believe it's God's desire for him to trust us with more. But it's just like the analogy I told you guys earlier about Jed, my son, right, with the knife. I'm not going to give him something too early, too soon, that's going to hurt him, right? Like God, you can't manipulate God. Like he sees our hearts. He knows who we truly are. That's why it's better to be open and be in the light and just expose some of this stuff. Like, hey, God, like I want to make more money, but right now, money's actually an idol to me. Amen. So I want to talk about this really quick. So it's like, for the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about wisdom. I think we can all agree we need wisdom, right? And we want to pursue wisdom to fulfill what God has called us to do, right? And the way you get wisdom is through the fear of the Lord. The way you get the fear of the Lord is by seeking him, basically dying to yourself. The opposite of what the world tells us to do. Just live life on your terms, self-care, book that trip, book that vacation to finally feel good again, right? It's like, no, we're supposed to die. We're supposed to be a living sacrifice, right? And that unlocks the fear of the Lord and favor as we live righteous. And we talked about all that last week. This week, we're talking about, wisdom again. But I want to talk about what to do with our money. Because I think as Christians, we have this unique window of opportunity where just in the natural, the economy is about to boom. Like crypto's booming, real estate interest rates are going to come down. And we're going to have this 4-year, hopefully, window of opportunity to see the wealth of the wicked transferred into the hands of the righteous. That's a Bible verse, by the way. So if you receive that, put amen in the chat, that you believe that the wealth of the wicked is going to transfer to us. But I want to show us what we're called to do with it when it does. Because if you will miss out on this transfer if you don't have a plan for it, and if you haven't been faithful with the little. So if you've been unfaithful with your money, you haven't been tithing, you haven't been sowing seed, you've been speaking, some of you, I can tell right now just by the Spirit that some of you have been speaking death over your money. You're looking at your bank account in your mind right now as I'm talking, and you're like, Brandon, I have $200 right now. I have $2,000. How in the world am I going to become wealthy? And how is the wealth going to be transferred to me? Well, stop speaking death over your seed and start to sow. Actually, that's part of the problem is you're not speaking death over your seed. You're speaking death over your bank account. You need to turn it into a seed and speak life over it. The Bible says, how does a seed come to life, right? It has to die. So I think what we do is, you know what? I've got a decent amount of money, but who cares, right? I'm just like, Lord, kill my selfish ambition. Take all my money, I don't care. It's yours, right? And whenever it falls into the ground, right, it can be watered and brought back and multiplied. But let's read this. Let's do this. Parable of the three servants. It's in Matthew 25, verse 14. If you guys want to turn there. This is really good. This is going to get good. Matthew 25, verse 14. Okay. Jesus is saying, again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last. Right? So just as we're talking, this speaks to the treasures, talents that you have and time right now. Right, that God's given you. Dividing it in proportion to their abilities. So God will never give you anything that you can't do or handle, right? He then left on his trip. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to do what? Invest the money. Type invest in the chat. Invest the money, and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. Right, so he doubled the investment, right? That's pretty good. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. Check this out. After a long time, their master returned from his trip. So just to recap, the guy who got the least amount took the money and buried it, right? Another guy got 2 and doubled it. And then the first guy invested as well. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account on how they had used his money. Okay? The servant whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned you 5 more. That's incredible. The master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount. So now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. And we were just talking about being faithful with little, right? The servant who had received the 2 bags of silver came forward and said, Master, you've given me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I've earned 2 more. He doubled his money again, right? Well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. And that's our goal, is to hear that when we die. Right? Well done, good and faithful servant. Then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man. My concern is that many of us see God as a harsh man. Right? That we see God as if he's up there with a rod ready to hit you with it. So then it causes you not to invest. It causes you not to steward. Right? So many of you, you have these business ideas, you've got these investment opportunities, but instead of taking them and taking the land, we're in fear that God's going to be mad at us, that God's not going to come through. So read this. He said, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant. Isn't that the goal, that we would harvest crops we didn't plant? And gathering crops that you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back. Right? But the master replied, you wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. Then he ordered, take the money from this servant and give it to the one with 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But for those who do nothing, even what little they do have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant out into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So this is obviously like a spiritual thing, but it also ties in to money. Right? So many of us, right, especially in business, let's say you start your business out and you're kind of in the, the fear mode, right, of like, okay, I don't know what I should do, but you actually invest. Like in the early stages of business, you're like all in. You believe in the idea. It starts to get momentum. And then what do? We switch from investing and expanding into, I need to save my money now, right? I need to take the cash my business is generating and be careful. Because when you don't have $100,000, it's very easy to be, like, okay, I'm just going to go all in. I'm going to invest this 500 here, this 1,000 here. But then it's like you finally get to your income goal where you feel safe, and then you switch from investing into burying, right? Into trying to conserve mode. So how the enemy works is the lie is you'll never make it. You'll never make it. You'll never make it. And then when you do make it, it switches to you're going to lose it. You're going to lose it. You're going to lose it. So then you go from multiplying the silver to burying it in the earth. I feel like there's some people in here whose God has already spoke to you on things to do and how to use your talents. He's told some of you to start making YouTube videos. He's told some of you to sow into different ministries. But instead, the fear of failure, yes, but also the fear that God is a harsh master, that he's not going to come through for you. But I'm telling you, over the next 4 years, there's a window of opportunity for us to establish the kingdom and for us to multiply what God has already given us. Type multiply in the chat if you believe it. Multiply. Let's do this. Luke chapter 12, the parable of the rich fool, and this is going to tie it all together. Luke chapter 12, verse 13. Parable of the rich fool. Then someone called from the crowd, "Teacher, please tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." Jesus replied, "Friend, who made me a judge over you to decide such things as that?" Then he said, "Beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own." So then he told them a story. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, "What should I do? I don't have room for all of my crops." That's a great place to be, I would imagine. Then he said, "I know. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have enough room to store all my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and say to myself, 'My friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy. Eat, drink, and become merry.'" So think about this. This is what I'm talking about. Out of fear of God in a bad way, thinking that he's mad at you, thinking that he's not going to come through for you, and out of fear of failure, it's like we're preconditioned to want to save up this money to then sit back and take it easy. But that's not a Bible verse, right? Like as Christians, we're called to conquer. We're called to take the land. We're called to see increase. We're called to multiply. And then God said this to him, "You fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for? Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship in God." So we've read a lot of different verses today and different perspectives and different stories, but to summarize a few things. We need wisdom, number one. We need to live righteously, and we need to multiply what's in our hand. There's people on this call who have been burying their talents out of fear, out of insecurity. Maybe you grew up poor and now you finally have got some cash in the bank and now you're just like playing it safe. But I'm here to tell you, we only have one life. And it's not a very long life. It's but a vapor. So when are you going to do what you said you were going to do? You're a single mom and you have to watch your kids. You're telling yourself when they're in college, you'll finally start the business. No, you won't. You're lying to yourself. Start it now. Start it now. You know what Paul did? He would actually preach everywhere he could. He would be going so hard doing what God told him to do that he would do it until God told him not to do it. So many of us are sitting there at a traffic light, at a red light, and you're like, oh my gosh, this, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know if God's in this. I don't know. Well, it's like, just try something. And if you're not supposed to do it, he'll tell you not to do it. Right? Anything's better than doing nothing. And you'll find along the way what you're called to do.